All right, thank you for joining us. Good evening. This is Faye D'Souza. There are two simultaneous cases moving across the country to do with narcotics or with drugs. I'm going to give you updates on both of those cases as we have them right now, and then bring in my expert, Mr. Kumar. But first, let me just give you the update. Of course, the case that everyone is talking about is the arrest of Aryan Khan, who's Shah Rukh Khan's son. Now, the reason why we waited to talk about this is because I always prefer to wait until there is a court hearing, because that is when the agency that is doing the investigation and has made the arrest has to present before the court what their case is. And that's the first official sort of news we get as to what is going on. So this is what the NCB presented today before the court. They said that they've taken about 8 people into custody. The 3 people and they divided them into 2 groups. 5 people were separate, and there were 3 people with the largest media glare on them, Aryan Khan and 2 of his friends. Now, incidentally, it turned out, according to NCB Sameer Wakade, who's the head of the NCB right now, who basically presented to court and told court that Arbas Merchant had 6 grams of charas on him, and Munmun, who is the other person, had 5 grams of charas that were recovered from both of them. Aryan Khan had no contraband or no drugs on him whatsoever. And so he was basically being charged with the possession or, consumption of very small quantities of narcotics. In this particular case, it's marijuana, it's weed or charas, as you might call it. Now, incidentally, we have to also understand the Indian law treats selling drugs and consuming drugs completely differently, because they're 2 different crimes. It treats consumption of small or possession of small quantities also. So personal consumption vis-a-vis actual large commercial quantities also differently. We'll explain that to you. Now, the argument here in court that was made by Aryan Khan's lawyer, Satish Manusinde, was basically that since he has not been found to be in possession and he has not been found to also be in consumption as of now, technically it's bailable and he should be released. But that was not the case, because the NCB argued that they've only had now 2 days to probe, because they actually picked them up on Saturday night. We're now on Monday afternoon. And they would like to investigate further and read through some WhatsApp chats, which they suggested are incriminating. Now, we don't know what's in these chats because they were not read out in court. The court is now given 3 more days custody until the 7th of October. That's where we are. Case number 2. We talked about with Mr. Kumar some time ago, and this is massive, the 3,000 kgs, so that's 3 tons of high-quality heroin that was seized from the Mundra port in Gujarat. Now, here's the update from 3 days ago, and the updates have been slim, I must tell you. Not too much is coming out as far as the investigation into this case is concerned, but it went to court, and that gives us a link and a sort of this thing into what is going on. So in court, the court pulled up the DRI for not getting details on 2 things. And I'll tell you what it is. So this is what the court said. Why don't you have details from Mundra port on who benefited or who was involved in this transaction? I'm quoting the court right now, because the DRI submitted that it has got statements recording and that Adani Group is right now seeking legal opinions on the matter. They're waiting for those legal opinions to come through. The court took exception and said, and I quote here, "What legal opinion? Are they above the law? Nobody is above the law. This is a serious matter involving the security of the country." The court demanded to know also why the DRI had not sought details as to who sent this consignment from Afghanistan. The court said, and I'm quoting here, "Have you contracted Afghanistan via the Indian embassy? 11 days have passed and you haven't asked Afghanistan as to who sent these containers. You are concerned only about these 2 people, the couple that have been arrested." So the court was very unhappy with the quality of the investigation that the DRI had presented before the court. Now, this is where these 2 cases are. The media, of course, will be completely taken with the Aryan Khan case because it involves a celebrity. But is that the true scandal? P. Chidambaram writes a column in the Indian Express every Sunday. In his previous column, last Sunday, he basically, as a former home minister, said 20,000 crore rupees, over $1 billion worth of drugs, somebody had to be the recipient, which means somebody was paying the bill on that delivery, right? And that cannot be done unless very, very powerful people are involved. Nobody has that kind of cash lying around. So it is a given that there are powerful people involved, which is why this is, like the court has rightly pointed out, a serious matter of national security, because we need to know who's involved and who's behind this. Also, that consignment, was it meant for Indian consumption? Are Indians consuming 3,000 kgs of heroin, or was it meant to be exported to another country? That's also a really big question to ask. But let me bring in my guest, and I want to introduce my guest here. Former Director General of the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, which is the DRI, which is currently working on the Mundra Port Trust case, and also former Chief of the Narcotics Control Bureau, which is the NCB, that's currently working on the Aryan Khan case. In fact, he was the first head of the NCB, so he actually wrote the book on how the NCB needs to function in India. Mr. B.B. Kumar has been kind enough to join us again. Mr. Kumar, good evening. We had some technical difficulties, but now we've got you, so I'm very happy.
Sorry for the
interruption. My first question. Yes. My first question to you is about the Aryan Khan case. Just to put things a little clearer, he was not found with any. He was not found in possession of even the charas that we're talking about. The person who was sharing the room with him had apparently 6 grams of charas. What is your assessment of the gravity of this case at this point? Or do you think that this is because of his celebrity that people are interested in?
No, you raised 2 important points.
Yes.
One was whether the drugs were found in the possession of Aryan Khan, and whether the quantities were not with him, or whether the quantities were minimum according to the notification issued under the NDPS Act. According to the press reports published, the NCB has claimed that they found 13 grams of cocaine. The minimum quantity, which is treated as small quantity, is 2 grams per cocaine. Then they found 5 grams of methadone and 22 pills of MDMA. There again, it is 2 grams, which is permitted to be as a low quantity. And 21 grams of charas, of course, it is sort of less, it comes under the small quantity. Once it exceeds 2 grams, in the case of cocaine, then the offense falls beyond the level of 6 months and 10,000 rupees. The punishment goes up to 1 year, and then penalty also goes up to 1 lakh. That is the first part. Then the other important part that is then one thing that the NCB missed in the first stage was to offload these 8 people and not searching the cabins of these persons who occupied, or the event manager, or if necessary, if there's any suspect within the ship crew, whether they were involved in other things. Now, belatedly, after I mentioned it to some other channel that this should have been done before the ship was released for proceeding on its journey to Goa, they should have checked up all these things. And anyway, belatedly, after the ship came back to Bombay, now they carried out the searches, and they found out 25 persons have been found using these drugs and other things, and some quantities of drugs were also seized. I personally felt that if they had carried out the searches immediately, much more quantities should have been found, and probably if some of them were wise, they would have dumped in the sea on the voyage. That is the other part. Now, coming to the Madras High Court observations, which were made on the petition filed by one Raj Kumar of Coimbatore, he raised this issue. Why Mundra Port authorities were not checked on other things. It is true. At this stage, though, there may not be any specific information of any person in the hierarchy controlling the Mundra port were involved or otherwise. It in the normal course, they should have checked up whether any particular person has connived with this landing of 3,000 kilograms of heroin. And earlier, as I mentioned in a former interview with you, that in month of July, 25 tons of heroin passed through Mundra port, and it probably is still in Gujarat somewhere, since it has not passed through any of the checkposts and other things. So I personally feel the NCB or the DRI should have carried out further investigation in the persons responsible for either receiving the containers or storing the containers in its proper place, or whether anybody would have tampered with the containers to remove the drugs and other things, is a matter which is required to be investigated further. So that's what I would like to mention at the outset, based upon your observations.
Mr. Kumar, you did say, of course, anything above 2 grams of cocaine no longer qualifies as a small amount, and then it attracts a larger, it attracts a larger punishment. I just want to draw it to your attention that Aryan Khan, Arbaz Said, And Munmun Damecha have been charged under Section 20 of the Drugs and Narcotics Act, the Narcotics and Psychotropic Substances Act, which is specific for a small quantity. And isn't that level of 2 grams different for Charas because it is not a psychotropic substance?
No, don't you think there was some variation in the quantities originally mentioned and the quantities now being mentioned before the court? So because the press note that was issued by the NCB, I find that what was found was 13 grams of cocaine and 5 grams of mephedrine and 22 pills of MDMA, and Charas was a small quantity of 21 grams. Whether it was found from the possession of Aryan Khan or anybody else along with him. So how do we know whether it was commonly being held by both the persons sharing the cabin or it was with him? Because he's the person who had the cash also to finance it. That type of a quantity and other things. That's important. 1 lakh and odd rupees was found with him. So had they searched the cabin,
Mr. Kumar, a couple of things I want to draw your attention to. There were over 1,000 people on that ship, apparently. So we don't know the quantities that you're talking about. Where among who was that? The larger quantities sourced from the MDM and the cocaine. Also, incidentally, in the fresh remand that was filed before the court today, the charge of financing the consumption of the drug has been dropped from these 3 people. So the question of whether Aryan Khan paid for the drugs or not no longer exists because the NCB themselves have dropped that charge. They no longer are charging him.
He had the cash. And had they carried out the searches, I'm only not mentioning about the 1,000 and odd passengers, 1,800 passengers, I believe, were on board. I'm not talking about them or their cabins to be searched or their place of stay should be searched. I'm only confining to these 8 people and probably the event manager, I'm sure he must have been on board. Or at least his representative would have been on board. And nobody would straight away give all the drugs to the users in a rave party and other things. As and when the payment is received, they will go on bringing out from the storage place and giving to them. They won't sort of expose themselves by placing everything on the table. So that's my first observation, because how could the NCB find in the return voyage, again, some quantities of drugs, again, 25 people being charged with possession or use of drugs and other things. That's one part. Second is, now the audio of WhatsApp messages which Aryan Khan has been dealing with his supplier, finds that since the last 4 years he's in the habit of using either hashish or even cocaine. We do not know, but unless the WhatsApp messages are deciphered, we will not know exactly what is the nature of drugs he is abusing. And that means he is a confirmed drug addict, because 4 years, if there's a cocaine habit,
no, but one second, Mr. Kumar, but there's no proof to that because it was not submitted before the court, and there's no evidence that has been submitted to a former drug addiction of any kind.
No, the NCB's press report in the first stage itself indicated that he was in touch, he was having WhatsApp messages in his mobile, and they've seized his mobile. So they have to be still studied and deciphered, and probably his further statement based on the WhatsApp is required to be recorded. So that's one part. But more than this, I personally feel this particular case is an eye-opener that something serious is happening as far as the cocaine smuggling is concerned into the country. I mean, that is the larger issue which is required to be dealt with, rather than this high-profile drug addicts who have been caught, which gives a lot of publicity. As you rightly pointed out, 3,000 kilograms of heroin doesn't get any publicity or further questioning by the NCB or the DRI to find out who are really behind that. Whereas for a couple of grams of either cocaine or MDMA or things like that, a lot of publicity is being given. I mean, a lot of media attention is being given. I mean, that looks a little lopsided.
I want to just ask you about the 3,000 kgs, because we talked about it a couple of weeks ago as well when this came out into the media. Referring to Mr. P. Chidambaram's column, where he said that if someone is paying the bill on 21,000 crore rupees, that person has to be very powerful. How would this work normally? If the consignment let's say, has arrived in India, would there be, how would that payment be made? How many people in our country would have 21,000 crore rupees to make a payment on a delivery like that?
No,
How
it
high
could have
profile
been,
is this likely to be?
it could have come on credit also. Because gold smuggling is done on a credit basis. So here also it could be the same. So we do not know. Or some part of the amount was paid probably to some persons. You see, the investigation in that Mundra case showed that Rajkumar was in Iran for some time, for some years during the course of his work. And so also the Chennai agent who was facilitated the import-export code, Varman, he was also in Iran for some years. So they have an Iran link, probably to reroute the shipment, which has arrived at Bandar Abbas from Pakistan and then forwarded to India. So there's a very wide angle to be further probed. And as
Mr.
far as this
Kumar, why
case is concerned,
why wouldn't the Taliban or whoever is shipping it out of Afghanistan send this consignment to Pakistan, to the Karachi port? Why would they send it to the Gujarat port?
no, it is to camouflage that it is not originated in Pakistan. The moment, for example, if a flight comes from Dubai, all the passengers and the luggage is thoroughly screened and thoroughly checked, because the customs expect that at least somebody would be carrying gold or some other contraband. But if the flight comes from UK, nobody checks. I mean, that rigorously. Some sort of screening is done, but not that rigorous. Similarly, if a consignment comes from Pakistan, certainly it is checked a little thoroughly to find out if any drugs are there in that. But the moment it comes from Iran, because Iran has a very strict law as far as drugs are concerned, they have to face death by death penalty or straight face a firing squad. And in the fight against the organizers of, the drug cartels within Iran, there are more than 3,000 people from the enforcement agencies of Iran were martyred, and more than 20,000 people were maimed. So Iran carries out a very thorough campaign against the drug traffickers. So the moment it comes from Bandar Abbas, the sort of a check that will go on will be a little reduced. Further, it was in transit. When a consignment is in transit, that type of scrutiny is not done even by the Indian customs, because they know that it's going for a further port and another destination. Except that in case they suspect a consignment is being or about to be substituted with another type of contraband.
So, Mr. Kumar, if you're saying that the rules, the laws in Iran are very strict towards narcotics, then how did such a large consignment come out of Iran towards India?
No, as I mentioned, it was in transit. And the official declaration was it contained the talc stones, semi-processed talc stones, which probably is used in the manufacture of talcum powder as one of the raw materials. So that's why probably it did not arouse suspicion. And even during the course of check, it was found that in the consignment that was taken out from the containers, half the container, half the bags, big jumbo bags were there, half the bag contained only talc stone. Below the talc stones, the heroin was concealed. So it was very well planned concealment. And unless one had specific information, it's very difficult to find out from a container.
Mr. Kumar, is it likely that this, and you said 25 tons before this and now 3 tons, so 28 tons of heroin were largely for Indian consumption, or was it likely to be sent forward to another country?
No, that type of consumption may not take place within the country, though the Indian consumption, according to the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, is 1/6 of the world production of drugs is consumed within the country. In 2004, the number of addicts were about 20.2%, which was about a few lakhs. Whereas by 2018, it became 22 million. And now, I don't know, the figure must be much, much higher. So the number of drug addicts, we are slowly becoming a nation of drug addicts by default. So it's a very serious problem we have to face. And what is important is the shift from the opium-based drugs like heroin or a plant-based drug like either ganja or hashish we are slowly shifting to synthetic drugs, which is a more dangerous thing, particularly if it is something like cocaine, which is synthetic, though it's a plant-based drug. It is synthetic, and then MDMA and Mandrax. These are the type of drugs that are being abused within the country. And even MDMA was being manufactured in a factory in Bida, which was busted by the DRI in 2005. And one Mohan Mankani, he financed something like 500 crore to set up the unit. And one Dr. KVS Prasad, who was a BITS Pilani alumni and who was a chemist and scientist, he helped in setting up the plant. And they were manufacturing MDMA on a large scale. And it's supposed to be manufacturing paracetamol. So on the same packing, they would put a mark to indicate which strip contained MDMA and which strip contained only paracetamol. Ultimately, it was found, and it was the magistrate who tried the case, the NDPS court, they convicted 5 persons to 20 years and lesser punishment for others who were involved. So they are one of the major cases involving MDMA manufactured within the country.
Mr.
So
Kumar,
also Mandrax in a number of factories.
Yes, when we spoke last time, I asked you if the DRI is likely to do an independent and an honest inquiry into the Mundra port matter. You said you have no reason to believe that it will be anything but honest. I respect that. But given the court's observations now, and they're very serious observations, do you still believe that this is an efficient investigation? I'm not asking about corruption here, but I'm asking about efficiency. Is this an efficient investigation on the behalf of the DRI if they have not even contacted Afghanistan yet to find out who sent this consignment?
No, follow-up will be done. I mean, they will not leave it at that. Follow-up action will be taken to tie up all the loose ends. And here, as you rightly said, it's not just the few persons who were apprehended, about 8 persons at that point of time. The number probably will increase, and they will certainly inquire whether any of the persons posted at Mundra port were involved in conniving with this landing operation. Why should they choose this particular port when the persons concerned were residing in Chennai? Their office was located in Vijayawada. Why should they land it in Mundra? And how much is the logistics cost?
Yes.
So landed in Chennai or at Vijayawada. Vijayawada has no port. They could have, nearest port is Visakhapatnam. They could have done that. So all these raises questions.
Yes, these were also questions that were in fact raised by the court itself, which asked why was this particular port used to transport or to land this consignment? If the eventual direction that it was meant to be is Vijayawada, they could have come in through the various other ports that are available in the south of India rather than the Gujarat port, which is why the court asked multiple times that the DRI should be examining the interest levels of the employees and the owners of the Mundra port, which the DRI did not do as of until the investigation. Also, I must point out, like I did at the beginning, that the details on this investigation have not been very, they've been a little sketchy. We haven't gotten too much information. The DRI was pulled up by the court for only focusing on the couple, which we understand they had earlier told us did not know what was in that consignment. They were being paid about 30,000 rupees for that consignment of 20,000 crore rupees. So it was obvious that this couple was just a front. But yet somehow, when they went to court, all they had was the arrest of these two people, which they were asking for a longer this thing on. Mr. Kumar, you had said that you expected more trails to emerge from this really large consignment, simply from the size of the consignment. Other people who would be involved in breaking it down, moving it across state borders and things like that. Are you surprised that that has not emerged up till now?
No, I think I fully agree with the observations of the Honorable Court in Madras as to why DRI should not investigate further into the persons involved in the port itself. That was a good thing. And I think you must have seen from the some of the press reports, it was not reported in all the press reports, that the National Investigating Agency is also looking into the whole background to find out who were the persons who were posted at Mundra port from the customs organization, who are also suspect within the Mundra port and other things. So side by side, they are also having a look into the background as to how such a large consignment came into India, because it has security concerns, apart from the fact that if it is consumed within the country, how much of population would have been, exposed to this habit of drug abuse.
Yes. So there is a question that is coming in and comes in every time we have this conversation, which is, again, coming back to the charas that we were talking about, 6 grams, 5 grams of charas, it's actually not even enough to fill one particular, smoke, from what I understand. But there are parts of the country where people smoke marijuana or cannabis very freely in our country. In other states where it is grown, for example, in some gatherings of religious people, it's smoked very, very freely. Is there a double standard between urban India and, because in urban India it's considered a narcotic, but if you go up to the hills, it's, it's considered recreational. How is that? How do these two situations coexist?
No, there are two species in the ganja plant. One is the female species and the other is the male species. Male species is what is abused, during that Shivratri time and other things. They make it into thandai and then they drink. And that appears to be a tradition probably in UP and some of the hill states in North India. But the female species is more dangerous of the ganja plant. And that is from that plant hashish is extracted. That is not used for thandai. So you have to distinguish between both the type of plants.
What is the difference between charas and hashish, sir?
No, hashish is the what you call the alkaloid that is extracted out of the leaf. In fact, I have seen the hashish being grown, ganja plants being grown in the hills at 8,000 feet in Kerala. I have myself taken about 100 officers, destroyed those. Even in very thick forest, when you climb to 8,000 feet, the forest is denuded there and the soil is so fertile. When ganja plant, which is normally about 3 feet, grows up to 6 feet to 7 feet. And when you sort of crush the leaf, you get that strong smell of hashish. It's so rich in the particular resin that comes out of that. And that is hashish. And it has fantastic value.
Okay.
And
Mr.
it's
Kumar,
looked after by tribals.
All right, Mr. Kumar, thank you so much for joining us.
At in caves.
Yes, and helping us understand all of this. We will, of course, have more conversations. I'm particularly interested in the Mundra port case because that is the more important case right now. We will put up excerpts of this conversation on Twitter and Instagram for the rest of our viewers as well. But while I thank Mr. Kumar, I want to tell our viewers to hold on. We're coming back with Deepak Lamba, who is with the Farmers Union, to talk about the protests that are taking place in Lakhimpur Kheri right now, because that's a really important, protest that we should talk about what's happened in Uttar Pradesh. We can't, as of now, we haven't been able to manage to get anybody from the BJP to comment on that matter.
That's a serious issue that's hitting the headlines.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we're going to just stay on the same conversation, and we're going to bring in Deepak Lamba as well while I read updates of what is happening right now in Uttar Pradesh. Mr. Kumar, thank you for joining us. Just bringing you an update for our viewers. As we bring in Deepak Kumar, let me give you an update of what has happened so far in Lakhimpur Kheri. While Mr. Kumar logs off, that was DB Kumar there, the former head of the NCB and the former head of the DRI, comparing the two cases that we had before us. So looking at Lakhimpur Kheri, and we had a couple of viewers actually point this out, saying you need to talk about this. So here we are, we've gotten somebody to talk about it, but ideally tomorrow we're going to try and get someone from the BJP to answer some questions as well, because they have not been answering questions, at least in a manner that they should be answering those questions. Let me see. So this is what we have so far. Remember, on Sunday, 4 farmers were killed when they were run over by one vehicle from the convoy of the Union Minister for State for Home Affairs, which is the junior minister in the Home Ministry of the Government of India. Now, it was said that his son and his relatives were part of that, sitting in that car. Now, the minister has disagreed. The minister's name is Ajay Mishra. He said that his son was not present at that, particular incident. What happened after that, though, was the farmers then, there was violence that took place. The people were pulled out of those cars. 2 cars were burnt. And 4 people who were not farmers died in that violence. A total of 8 people have died altogether. The 4 farmers were Lavpreet Singh, Gurvinder Singh, Daljit Singh, and Nachar Singh. FIR has been registered against the minister and his son. No arrests have been made so far. The farmers were protesting all day today, asking for two things: that the FIR be registered and compensation be given to the victim's family. That has now been announced by the UP Additional DG Law and Order Prashant Kumar. There will be ex gratia of 45 lakh rupees to the families of those who died and 10 lakh rupees to those who were injured. Ajay Mishra, though the minister in question, has demanded a CBI investigation and 50 lakh rupees compensation for the families of the BJP workers who died in the violence that followed. Priyanka Gandhi made her way to Uttar Pradesh. She was detained by the Uttar Pradesh police. She is apparently now on a hunger strike. And she was not the only member of opposition who was detained. Samajwadi Party Chief Akhilesh Yadav was detained outside his home. He was not allowed to go to Lakhimpur Kheri. Punjab Deputy Chief Minister was detained as well. His flight was not allowed to land in Lucknow, but he then made his way on by road, and he was stopped outside of the district. They were members of the Aam Aadmi Party and members of the Bharatiya Kisan Union who were not allowed to enter the district either. So what we understand right now, this situation is still simmering across the country, and we're still waiting for updates from that. But I'm being told that Deepak Lamba is not accessible at this point. We're going to, unfortunately, we will bring you updates as and when we have them to our viewers, and we will try and put together a full conversation on this matter tomorrow, where we'll be able to bring in maybe someone from the BJP to talk about what's happening in Uttar Pradesh and the steps that the Uttar Pradesh government is taking to make sure that something like this doesn't continue to happen, as what happened in Lakhimpur Kheri. Also, the worrying situation of opposition leaders and politicians, who are being detained across, Uttar Pradesh as well. Let me just check if Deepak Lamba is with us. Deepak ji, क्या आप हमारे साथ जुड़े हुए?
जी मैं हूं आपके साथ जी।
वेरी गुड। दीपक जी, थैंक यू फॉर जॉइनिंग अस। क्या आप हमें बता सकते हैं अभी अगर आप अपने बाकी साथियों से आपकी बात हो पाए, अभी उत्तर प्रदेश में क्या हो रहा है?
देखिए, सुबह से तो काफी टेंस था माहौल, लेकिन जब से कल शाम को जो मांग थी वो दो ही मांग थी मेन। एक तो ये था कि जो राज्य केंद्रीय जो मंत्री हैं, राज्य गृह मंत्री, वो उनको बर्खास्त किया जाए। दूसरी मांग ये थी कि जो उनके बेटे रिश्तेदार हैं सबके ऊपर 302 का मुकदमा और इसकी जो जांच है वो कोर्ट की निगरानी में हो। ये दो मुख्य मांग थी। उसी पे एक फैसला ये था कि हम 10 बजे से देश के हर जिला मुख्यालय पे प्रदर्शन करने का फैसला हुआ था। तो सुबह से काफी टेंस था माहौल, क्योंकि आप मतलब कोई भी आदमी कल की घटना देखने के बाद उसमें उसको गुस्सा आना जायज है। मतलब जिस तरह से वो सब कुछ हुआ उसमें किसानों को भी काफी गुस्से में थे, सब कुछ था। लेकिन दोपहर को कुछ ये रहा कि वो कोर्ट की निगरानी में जो न्यायिक जांच है उसका यस हो गया। उसके बाद जो आश्रित हैं उनको कुछ मुआवजे का हो गया, साथ में वो जो हत्या का मुकदमा था वो भी दर्ज हो गया। और ये सब चीजों से ये हुआ कि थोड़ा सा जो टेंस वाला माहौल था वो कम हुआ है, लेकिन जो मुख्य मांग थी वो अभी भी बची हुई है। मतलब आप ये देखिए ना कि
दीपक जी सॉरी, एक मिनट, मुझे आपसे ये भी पूछना था। ये बहुत गलत हुआ कि जो 4 किसान भाइयों को मार दिया गया, उनको गाड़ी के नीचे गाड़ी उनके ऊपर चढ़ा के, लेकिन उसके बाद जो वायलेंस हुई जिसमें और 4 जन मरे, इसके बारे में जिक्र क्यों नहीं हो रहा?
नहीं, इसके बारे में जिक्र हो रहा है, मतलब ऐसा नहीं है। देखिए, रिपोर्ट तो जो आपको पता है, जब कहीं भी वीडियोग्राफी होती है, कोई भी आदमी वीडियो बनाता है तो वीडियो और मशीन तो कभी डिफरेंशिएट नहीं करती हैं। तो वो सब तरह के वीडियो तो सर्कुलेट हो रहे हैं, लेकिन उसमें आप ये देखिए ना कि गुस्सा कैसे जनता के बीच में फैलाया जाता है। 2 दिन पहले मंत्री जी का वीडियो है और जिस दिन घटना हुई उस दिन हमारे खुद के मुख्यमंत्री हैं हरियाणा के। अब देखिए, नेताओं का क्या है कि नेता तो बंद कमरे में बैठ के आराम से भाषण दे के प्रवोक करके निकल जाते हैं। उसके बाद उसके इम्प्लीमेंटेशन या उसके बाद जो उनके समर्थक हैं या जो अलग अलग विचारों के लोग हैं वो उनको कैसे लेते हैं, ये जिम्मेवारी भी कहीं ना कहीं बनती है। अब मंत्री जी के बेटे ने ही उस बात के बाद कैसा रुख अपनाया, और वो गाड़ी पीछे से आई है, लोगों ने बाद में जो रिपोर्ट सामने आई हैं, लोग पैदल जा रहे हैं और वो पीछे से आया है, पीछे से तीनों गाड़ियां टक्कर मारती हुई आगे निकली हैं। और जो पहली गाड़ी है जो कि थार थी, वो वहां रुकी है जहां पे तेजेंद्र विर्क, ये हमारे तराई क्षेत्र के एक किसान संगठन के अध्यक्ष हैं, जो संयुक्त किसान मोर्चे में पहले दिन से ही उस इलाके का प्रतिनिधित्व करते हैं। अभी जो संयुक्त किसान मोर्चे की कमेटी बनाई गई थी, उसमें भी इनका मुख्य रोल था, जो यूपी और उत्तराखंड के संदर्भ में थी। तो ये जाना माना चेहरा है। और ये भी रहा कि उनको चोट लगने के बाद मेदांता रेफर किया गया, ऐसी खबर आई हमें कि चोट उनकी सीरियस है। तो ये जरूर रहा कि 3 लोगों का और पता लगा है कि उसके बाद वायलेंस में 3 लोग की और मौत हुई है। एक पत्रकार साथी भी कह रहे हैं कि वो कहीं किसी गाड़ी की चपेट में ही आया है। तो टोटल 8 की सूचना है अभी तक, लेकिन घायल अभी भी हॉस्पिटल्स में है। तो ये फे जी, आप और हम सब लोग समझते हैं कि 1 साल से जो आंदोलन में नेताओं की भूमिका रही है, हर बड़े नेता ने शांतिपूर्वक आंदोलन की सलाह और पब्लिक जितने भी प्लेटफॉर्म हैं उनसे हमेशा ऐसे ही एड्रेस किया है। आप देखिए, किसानों के नेताओं ने कभी भी किसानों को किसी चीज के लिए प्रोवोक नहीं किया, लेकिन दूसरी तरफ से जो भाषण होते हैं, ये लीडर कोई छोटे नहीं है। आप देखिए, राज्य गृह मंत्री यदि हायरार्की में बात किया जाए तो वो तीसरे नंबर पे हैं। आप प्रधानमंत्री के बाद केंद्रीय कैबिनेट मिनिस्टर गृह मंत्री होता है, और उसके बाद ये इनका ओहदा आता है जिसके अंडर सारी पैरामिलिट्री और पुलिस आती है। गृह मंत्रालय मतलब कंट्रोल करता है। और इस लेवल का आदमी जब ऐसी भाषण देता है, ऐसी बात करता है, तो मतलब ये समझना होगा। देखिए, हिंसा जब भी होती है, लोगों का गुस्सा अलग ढंग से बिहेव करता है, लेकिन नेताओं की अपनी जिम्मेवारी बनती है। वो जिम्मेवारी मुझे लगता है
जैसे
उधर
दीपक जी,
से
अभी हरियाणा के जो चीफ मिनिस्टर है मनोहर लाल खट्टर जी, उन्होंने कहा है अपने सपोर्टर्स को कि आप 500-700 लोगों की संख्या इकट्ठा करो, आप लाठियां उठाओ, बेल हम इंतजाम कर लेंगे।
हाँ, तो मतलब इस तरह के जो बयान है, मैं वही आपको कह रहा हूं कि ये मुझे लगता नहीं कि इस तरह के व्यक्तित्व और इस तरह के बयान देने वाले कोई नेता बनने लायक लोग हैं। नेताओं का लोग
बट दीपक जी, अभी सुप्रीम कोर्ट का भी कहना है, सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने काफी सख्त लैंग्वेज यूज किया है, और
हाँ,
उनका भी कहना है कि अभी आप जो है दिल्ली की शहर और दिल्ली की लोगों को बांध के रखा है आपने। वो लोग अपने काम नहीं कर पा रहे क्योंकि आपने सारे हाईवे ब्लॉक करके रखे हैं। कितने कितने महीनों के लिए ये चलेगा? आप कोर्ट में क्यों नहीं आते? इसका जवाब क्या है आपके पास? आप कोर्ट में क्यों नहीं जाते?
नहीं, इसका जवाब के अलावा जो आपने मेरे से पूछा, उसमें जो ऑब्जर्वेशन है ना, वो 5 ऑब्जर्वेशन है। तो मैं बल्कि ये मतलब आपके थ्रू ये बताना चाहूंगा कि वो 5 ऑब्जर्वेशन जो हैं, ये क्वेश्चन जो है इसमें 5 पॉइंट हैं। पहला पॉइंट, सुप्रीम कोर्ट की तरफ से ये ऑब्जर्वेशन आया है कि आप कोर्ट में भी हैं और आप वहां आंदोलन भी कर रहे हैं, ये क्यों? तो इसके जवाब में हमारे नेता और संयुक्त किसान मोर्चे ने ये कहा है, जो ये संगठन सुप्रीम कोर्ट में गया है, इसका नाम है किसान महापंचायत के नाम से नाम है, और इसके जो नेता हैं वो राजस्थान के हैं, राजा राम जाट जी, जो कि संयुक्त किसान मोर्चे का कभी पार्ट नहीं रहे। तो संयुक्त किसान मोर्चा पहले दिन से कभी भी कोर्ट के बीच में नहीं गया। आपको याद होगा, हमारे कुछ पहले के प्रोग्राम हैं, उसमें ये बात उठी थी कि कोर्ट क्यों नहीं जाते। तो हमारी तरफ से यही हमने दिया था पॉइंट कि ये जो लड़ाई है जनता और जनता के चुने हुए प्रतिनिधियों के बीच की है, तो इसमें कोर्ट का शामिल होना हमारे संयुक्त किसान मोर्चे की तरफ से नहीं हुआ। दूसरा, आज जो ऑब्जर्वेशन थी वो ये थी कि कानून है कहाँ। कोर्ट ने पूछा है कि ये माननीय कोर्ट के जज साहब ने बोला है, मतलब ऑब्जर्वेशन में, कि कानून तो है ही नहीं, आप किस चीज के लिए लड़ाई लड़ रहे हैं। तो आप देखिए कि माननीय कोर्ट ने ही शुरुआत में स्टे किया था। जब कानून है तभी तो स्टे किया था, और कानून पास भी है लोकसभा राज्यसभा से, तो कानून तो एग्जिस्ट करते हैं। तीसरा ऑब्जर्वेशन उन्होंने ये कहा है कि आप ऐसा नहीं कर सकते कि आप या तो सड़क चुने या आप अदालत चुने। तो उसमें यह था कि भाई, हम तो शुरुआत से कहते हैं कि हमारी जो लड़ाई है वो तो आंदोलन की है, हम कानूनी लड़ाई नहीं लड़ रहे हैं। कानून बीच में जरूर आता है, उसके लिए देखिए कोर्ट का और जुडिशरी का अपना एक महत्व है। लॉ एंड ऑर्डर की सिचुएशंस में इनको आना ही है, और उसके लिए सब बाध्य हैं, सरकार भी बाध्य है, हम भी बाध्य हैं उसको मानने के लिए। लास्ट में उन्होंने एक ऑब्जर्वेशन और किया, उन्होंने कहा कि जब हम इनकी लीगलिटी के ऊपर फैसला देने वाले हैं, बात करने वाले हैं, जांच कर रहे हैं, तब आप आंदोलन क्यों कर रहे हैं? तो इसमें बहुत अच्छा एक तर्क हमारे नेताओं की तरफ से ये आया कि ऐसा कहीं नहीं लिखा है कि कोई मामला कहीं है और उसके ऊपर आप आंदोलन या मांग नहीं उठा सकते, पहली बात। दूसरी बात, वो मामला भी किसान संगठन लेके नहीं गए हैं कोर्ट में, वो कोई एक मामला किसी और ने दायर किया। दूसरा, 1 साल से माननीय कोर्ट ने उसके ऊपर 1 मिनट नहीं लगाया है, एक बार भी सुनवाई नहीं हुई है। तो आप मतलब ठीक है, ऑब्जर्वेशन वाली बात ठीक है, अभी ऑर्डर की एग्जैक्ट कॉपियां आ जाएंगी तो हमारे भी जो लीगल एक्सपर्ट हैं या जैसे भी हमारे को, और पीछे भी एक प्रोपेगेंडा मैं बताना चाहूंगा,
जी
पिछली
जी
बार भी एक मामला आया था कि जिसमें कहा गया था कि कोर्ट कह रहा है रास्ते के लिए खोल दीजिए। उस पर्टिकुलर जब ऑर्डर हमने पढ़ा, उसमें कहीं भी किसान और किसान संगठन पार्टी नहीं थे, वो तो बल्कि गवर्नमेंट्स को आदेश दे रहे थे कि आप इसके लिए कर क्यों नहीं रहे कुछ। और इसको यदि मैं अपने लैंग्वेज में अपनी तरफ से देखना चाहूं तो मैं तो ये कहूंगा कि कोर्ट सरकार को प्रेशराइज कर रहे हैं कि आप बात करो, किसानों से बात क्यों नहीं कर रहे, आप कर क्यों नहीं रहे। उसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि आप फोर्स का यूज करके किसानों को हटाएंगे, उसका मतलब ये बनता है कि आप उनके नेताओं से बात क्यों नहीं कर रहे। कोर्ट तो
जी।
उसको ये कह रहा है और वो उसका इंटरप्रेट करके प्रोपोगंडा किसी और रूप में।
लेकिन अब दीपक जी, अगर कोर्ट ने कल अपनी सुनवाई में अपने ऑर्डर में ये बोलते हैं कि आप लोग आपको हटानी चाहिए अभी, या आप लोग हट जाओ अभी हाईवे से, हाईवे ब्लॉक करना मत बंद कीजिए, क्या आप लोग कोर्ट की ये ऑर्डर को मानेंगे?
देखिए, हम हमारे नेता संयुक्त किसान मोर्चा हमेशा से ये कहता है कि जो सर्वोच्च न्यायालय है उसकी इज्जत रखना हर सिटीजन का फर्ज है, और हम उसमें हमेशा मतलब हमने किया भी है। आज तक कोई ऐसा मामला नहीं हुआ कि हमने कोर्ट का नाफरमानी की हो। और जहां तक ऑर्डर का सवाल है, ऑर्डर आने के बाद ये जरूर है, हमारे नेता, हमारे जो लीगल सेल के एक्सपर्ट हैं या जो बड़े वकील हमारे को सपोर्ट करते हैं, वो उस ऑर्डर को देखेंगे और जो यथासंभव जो भी हमारे वे आउट होगा या जो हम तरीका अपनाएंगे वो तो उसके बाद की बात है। लेकिन ये जरूर है कि रास्ते खाली होने के लिए तो हम ये कह ही रहे हैं कि हमारी जो मांगे हैं वो मांगे, मतलब मुझे लगता है कि आंदोलन जब शुरू होता है तो उसकी मांगे, ऐसा नहीं होता कि उसकी मांगे 50 हैं, ये मांगे भी थोड़ी हैं, स्पष्ट हैं, इसीलिए आंदोलन 1 साल से टिका है।
जी दीपक जी, मुझे एक चीज बताइए, अभी सुनने को आया कि लखीमपुर खीरी की तरफ से, पंजाब से, हरियाणा से, काफी जगह से फार्मर लीडर्स या किसान लीडर्स अभी इकट्ठा हो रहे, आगे का प्लान क्या है?
नहीं, आगे का प्लान तो अभी तो यही है कि मोर्चे जहां कायम है वहां रहेंगे। और आज तो ये सब घटना जो कर्म सुबह से हुए, उसके बाद मुझे जो खबर है सब लीडर्स वापस दिल्ली की तरफ और अपने अपने मोर्चों की तरफ आना शुरू हो गए हैं। जैसे हमें कुछ खबर आई थी कि वापसी के समय मेरठ में कुछ लीडर्स को थोड़ी देर के लिए रोक लिया गया, बाकी सब वो जो संयुक्त रूप से घोषणा हो गई थी कि भाई अब शांति का है और उस तरह से है, वो सारी चीजें हुई हैं। तो मुझे लगता नहीं कि अब सेंटर जो है वो यूपी में है, सेंटर तो वही है जहां संयुक्त किसान मोर्चा था, और दिल्ली के चारों तरफ जो बॉर्डर्स हैं, तो सब नेता वापस आ रहे हैं, इधर की तरफ ही बढ़ रहे हैं। तो ऐसा नहीं है कि वहीं रह के कुछ करना है।
लेकिन जो जो ऑपोजिशन, जो पॉलिटिशियंस है, जो किसान के नेता नहीं है, जो पॉलिटिकल पार्टी के नेता जैसे कांग्रेस के या
जी,
अखिलेश यादव, आम आदमी पार्टी वगैरह, जो लखीमपुर खीरी की तरफ गए थे, जिनकी डिटेंशन हुई थी, क्या आपको लग रहा है अभी ज्यादा पॉलिटिसाइज हो रही है बात?
देखिए, जब भी फे जी आप मेरे से ज्यादा एक्सपीरियंस हैं, आपको पता है जहां लोगों का समर्थन होगा, लोग जहां इकट्ठा होंगे, पॉलिटिकल पार्टियां तो जरूर वहां शामिल होने की कोशिश करेंगे, पहली बात। दूसरी बात, आपको भी पता है कि जितने पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज हैं, संयुक्त किसान मोर्चा कभी भी उन्हें अपने स्टेज पे जगह नहीं देता, ना किसी मीटिंग में बुलाता है। तो अब पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज को जो फैसले लेने हैं वो अपने विवेक से, अपनी पॉलिटिकल विचारधारा और अपने आगे के प्रोग्राम को देख के लेते हैं। अब वहां यूपी जो जा रहा है, चाहे वो पॉलिटिकल पार्टी का है या किसानों के समर्थन में है या आंदोलनकारी कोई किसान संगठन का है, देखिए फ्रीली इधर उधर जाने का, मूवमेंट का तो अधिकार सबको होना चाहिए। मतलब उसमें मैं मतलब यदि मेरे से पूछें कि जाना चाहिए नहीं जाना चाहिए, वो उनका फैसला है, लेकिन कम से कम रोकने वाला फैसले नहीं होने चाहिए। जैसे आपने देखा कि बहुत से जो हमारे लीडर्स थे उनको भी नहीं जाने दिया गया, रोका गया। राकेश टिकैत जी समहाउ कल बैरिकेड इधर उधर करके लोगों ने उनको थोड़ा वहां तक पहुंचाया। तो मतलब एक ये, मैं इस बारे में तो नहीं ये कह रहा कि पार्टीज को जाना चाहिए कि नहीं जाना चाहिए, क्योंकि ना हम उनके कंट्रोल में है, ना वो हमारे कंट्रोल में है, और ना हम उनके साथ हैं और ना वो हमारे साथ किसी मंच पे हैं।
दीपक जी, हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए बहुत धन्यवाद। और दीपक जी तो पिछले काफी महीने से हमारे साथ बात कर रहे हैं. Or we hope that we can continue to talk about this in the future and track the updates from the farmer protest. Deepak Lamba, who is a farmer leader, joining us to tell us what's happening in Lakhimpur Kheri. For our audience, though, stay with us. At exactly 9 o'clock, the news is coming up. Just the news, only the information of everything that has happened during the day. Thank you for watching. Good night.